I bought this repossessed Bugatti Veyron with supposedly a broken gearbox, but we managed to solve the problem with just a tiny fuse.
You have felt that moment when something you built with your own hands finally gets tested, and your stomach drops before the result arrives. Matt Armstrong lived that on an empty runway. His Bugatti Veyron, rebuilt from a repossessed wreck, broke down while chasing 200 miles per hour.
The top speed of the Bugatti Veyron is 253 miles an hour.
58, 206, I'm going faster than I can speak.
And what happened in the seconds afterwards came far closer to killing him than anyone watching realized at the time on camera. The number that stopped everything. As you sit here watching this, that Veyron is not moving. It is not chasing anything. It is parked in a quiet English workshop, completely dead, waiting on one small electronic box that Bugatti has quoted at $59,358, which lands somewhere around £45,000, depending on the day you check the rate. When I first saw that figure, I assumed it was for something enormous, something 4 men would need to lift. It is none of those things. It is the fuel pump control module.
And it was a different fault every time. This fault we're getting now is no communication with the fuel pump control module. So the car will start up for about 1 second.
A sealed unit roughly the size of a paperback that tells the fuel pumps how hard to work and how much pressure to hold in the rails. When Matt plugged his diagnostic tool into a silent million-pound hypercar, the message that came back was almost insulting in how plain it was. No communication from the fuel pump control module. The part of the car responsible for feeding the engine had simply stopped answering.
This definitely looks like fuel pump, because it says invalid data received from fuel pump control module.
That is not good news.
No.
Bugatti confirmed they had one sitting in stock at Molsheim in France. They also confirmed that the car itself has to physically be there for the part to go in, and that the whole process would take something in the region of 2 weeks.
2 weeks, which is crazy for something that's in stock. Like, are they going to walk it from Molsheim, France to Manchester? But
Matt put down a deposit and then said something that tells you exactly where his head was by that point, because he explained that he was going to make it his job to make their job as easy as possible to fit that fuel pump control module. That is not the voice of a man who believes he is winning an argument. That is the voice of a man who has run out of road and has quietly accepted it. What has happened since then is the part that genuinely unsettles me. His channel has carried on at full speed, with a broken GT3 RS that Porsche refused to touch, and a $700,000 body kit going onto the wrecked Chiron. The most watched rebuild of his entire career, the project whose purchase video alone pulled more than 13 million views, has gone completely quiet, which makes the whole thing far stranger than it looks, because this is the same man who beat this car once already, and it cost him $3 to do it. The $3 miracle. When the Veyron first landed at his workshop, the headline fault was the one that drains the color out of every Bugatti owner's face. The car would not select a single gear in either direction, and no amount of persuasion changed that. The engine ran perfectly happily, the dashboard lit up like a fruit machine, and the transmission simply refused to engage with any of it. The Veyron runs a 7-speed dual-clutch gearbox built by Ricardo, which is the British engineering firm that has built transmissions for Formula One teams and for the McLaren F1. It was the first 7-speed dual-clutch ever put into production anywhere, and it is rated to handle up to 1,500 Newton-meters of torque without complaint. Bugatti does not open that gearbox, and Bugatti does not repair it either, because their procedure is to replace the entire sealed assembly, and the figure that gets thrown around for that job sits somewhere near $300,000. Another British creator, Mark McCann, went through this exact nightmare with his own Mansory Veyron, and the worst-case estimates on his car climbed towards $600,000 before anyone had even lifted a spanner. So Matt was standing in front of a car that would not move at all, staring down an invoice that cost more than most Ferraris parked outside. Then he found it, and it was a 40-amp fuse that had melted rather than blown cleanly,
But we managed to solve the problem with just a tiny fuse.
the way a healthy fuse is supposed to fail. It had melted because somewhere down the line a previous owner had grown tired of it popping and had simply kept fitting progressively bigger fuses until the circuit could no longer argue back with him. That is the automotive version of jamming a coin behind a fuse in your house and calling the problem solved. The car had been politely warning somebody for months that something was wrong, and rather than listening to the warning, somebody just kept silencing the messenger. He fitted a fresh one, and the gearbox worked immediately. The way he described it afterwards was almost too calm for what it actually meant, because he pointed out that a new gearbox is 300,000 pounds, and he had just bought a fuse from Halford's instead. That exact pattern was about to repeat itself in a way nobody had noticed yet, and the next round of it cost Bugatti something they value far more highly than money. The bill Bugatti never wanted you to see. The engine runs a dry sump system with 16 separate oil drain plugs scattered around it. To reach every one of them, you have to strip the rear bumper off, pull the wheel liners out, and remove carbon panels that were never designed to be removed quickly by anybody. Bugatti's own official procedure runs somewhere between 24 and 27 hours of labor, and the resulting bill typically lands between $21,000 and $25,000, purely to change the oil. Manny Koshpin, who has owned several of these cars over the years, has quoted figures in exactly that same territory, alongside roughly $38,000 for a set of tires, around $50,000 for rims, and $13,547.75 for one single spare key. Bugatti quoted Matt somewhere around $27,000 to service his particular car. He went ahead and did the entire job himself for £1,193.83, which converts to somewhere near $1,600. The money involved is not actually the part that stings, though, because what he discovered while he was in there matters far more. The W16 engine is essentially two VR8 engines joined together at 90 degrees. Volkswagen Group also built a W12, which is two VR6 engines joined in the same fashion. And that W12 lives inside the Bentley Continental GT, the VW Phaeton, and the Audi A8. What that means in practice is that parts cross over between them. The ignition coils on the Veyron come from the same family of coils used across those far cheaper cars, and Bugatti wanted $245 for each one, while the aftermarket wanted a small fraction of that. The gearbox accumulators, which are the pressure vessels that allow the transmission to shift at all, turned out to have close relatives sitting in the parts catalog of a VW Lupo.
And now I do know why. A Volkswagen Lupo was the first car I ever really had to save up for, and I remember picking it up.
Which was a tiny city car that people bought largely because it was cheap to insure. Matt asked the question that everybody in the comments was already shouting at their screens because he wondered aloud whether he was genuinely paying for the engineering or whether he was simply paying for the badge on the nose. Bugatti's chief executive, Mate Rimac, has pushed back hard against this entire genre of video. During Matt's earlier Chiron project, Rimac said publicly,
"Can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that."
That there has been a great deal of talk about Bugatti service, repair, and maintenance costs online, and that most of what you hear is simply not true. He also said that they do not think backyard hypercar repair is safe, and that he would love to support it, but it is not the right thing to do. Bugatti then locked that Chiron's chassis number so that no dealer anywhere would supply parts for it. Then he went after the one component on the entire car that was supposed to be beyond the reach of anybody at all. the key that was never a key. To take a Veyron beyond roughly 234 miles per hour, pressing the accelerator harder achieves absolutely nothing because you need a second key to unlock the rest of the car. That key slides into a slot down beside the driver's left leg, and you turn it while the car is stationary so the car can run a complete check on itself. If it approves what it finds, it drops the ride height from around 125 millimeters down to about 65 at the front, closes the front diffuser flaps, and folds the rear wing down into its low drag position. Only after all of that does 253 miles per hour become available to you. Matt received exactly one key when he bought the car, and it was not the speed key. Bugatti would not quote him a price for a replacement at all, and the number that circulates in owner circles sits somewhere north of $10,000.
Now the speed key from Bugatti looks really fancy, but there's rumors that it's over $10,000.
Although Matt is careful to describe that as a rumor on camera because nobody has ever produced an actual receipt to prove it. So he brought in an automotive locksmith called Dips from P1 Auto Keys, and together, the two of them did something that appears never to have been filmed before by anyone. They held a coil detector inside the speed key slot, hunting for the transponder, which is the electronic ring that reads the chip inside the key and confirms to the car that it is genuine. The most mythologized feature on the most mythologized car of the modern era turned out to be a purely mechanical slot, and a blade turning a mechanism is the entire trick. Matt's reaction was that quiet sort of disbelief that always hits harder than shouting ever could, because he said that something hyped up to be so special could just be a key slot. They scanned his original ignition key, cut a matching blade from it, dropped that blade into a plain housing that cost roughly the price of a coffee, and slid the whole thing into the slot, which turned out to be the entire problem, because the car had not finished with him yet. Death by 1,000 modules. The rebuild itself looked like the straightforward part on paper. There was fresh paint on the rear bumper, the old white wrap came off, and every light blue section was replaced with a satin metallic silver finish that nobody had ever put on a Veyron before. Matching satin went onto the fuel cap, the oil cap, the mirrors, and the door handles. A damaged mirror glass was fixed by cutting a replacement surface by hand so that the heating element still worked properly. Every undertray went back into position because Bugatti designed that floor to stay perfectly smooth at speed. And a missing panel does not merely cost you drag, it costs you the stability that keeps the car pressed onto the ground. Then the faults started arriving, like debt collectors who knew the address. The car dropped into limp mode on the first real drive and lost power within seconds. Warning lights appeared, vanished, and were replaced by entirely different ones before anybody could write them down. The indicators died completely, while the hazard lights kept working perfectly, which proved the bulbs were healthy, and the fault was hiding somewhere in the wiring instead. They ended up testing every single fuse in the box individually with a multimeter, because there is no publicly available fuse diagram for this car anywhere. Hours disappeared into that job, and the culprit turned out to be a 5-amp fuse. Then came a misfire on cylinder 16. They tried a Bentley W12 coil pack that looked identical in length and even shared the same seal, and they moved a Bugatti coil across to a different cylinder to watch which way the fault would travel. The misfire followed the Bentley coil across, and cylinder 16 went clean, which proved the point neatly. The real answer was almost embarrassing, because the original coil had simply never been fully seated, and it pushed in noticeably further than the others once somebody finally noticed. Then, the gearbox failed again, while they were fitting the new wheels, with reverse disappearing first, and then everything else following it. The engine kept running, the pump was still clearly audible, and the transmission refused to move at all. One hydraulic accumulator was bleeding pressure so quickly that the pump had to run almost constantly just to keep up with it. New accumulators were nearly impossible to source with the runway booking already closing in, so they found one, fitted it, and effectively bought themselves time rather than an actual cure. Then the tire pressure warning refused to clear, and that alone is enough to block top speed mode entirely, because the car will not unlock its own limit while it believes a tire is unhappy. Not one of those failures involved the engine, and not one of them involved the chassis. Every single one was electrical, electronic, or hydraulic control, and every single one lived inside a system Bugatti never intended anybody outside Molsheim to touch. The dashboard finally went clean, and that is when they drove to the one place in Britain where all of this was supposed to mean something. The runway that was never long enough. Adraham. Dunsfold Aerodrome is a name you already know, even if you think you do not, because it served as the Top Gear test track for 18 years, sitting on an old wartime airfield in Surrey with a figure of 8 circuit painted across the runways. What almost nobody says out loud about that place is that it is not a top-speed venue, and it never was one. When Bugatti wanted to prove 253 miles per hour, they went to Erlesien in Germany, which offers a straight-running almost 5.5 miles long. That is where James May reached 259.49 miles per hour on the 4th of July 2010, and where Pierre-Henri Raffanel set the 267.856 mile per hour record on that very same day. It is also where Andy Wallace took a Chiron to 304.773 miles per hour in 2019, and his description of that run remains one of the most honest things any driver has ever admitted about speed, because he explained that you cannot lift, you just go with it and hope that it is all right. Dunsfold offers you a fraction of that distance, which means the braking zone stops being a detail and becomes the entire equation you are gambling on. The rain arrived first, so they waited for the tarmac to dry, because a wet surface makes the whole exercise pointless and lethal at the same time. Matt pulled on a helmet and admitted how absurd it felt to be wearing racing gear while sitting on soft, heated leather in a cabin designed for comfort. He had never driven this car anywhere near its limit before, and he had never traveled beyond 170 miles per hour in anything at all. So he did the sensible thing and took one moderate opening run, purely to learn the braking distances, feel the weight of the car, and understand what it does when it is finally allowed to breathe properly. He turned around for the second pass, and the Veyron cut its own power while he was moving. He crawled the car back to the paddock, while everybody outside watched a Bugatti limping toward them like a wounded animal. It fired briefly, and then struggled to stay running at all. There were no leaks underneath it, and no visible damage anywhere, and almost nothing on a dashboard that should have been screaming at him. The scanner gave them the only clue available, and that clue turned out to be worth far more than the car deserved. The factory was always the answer. The message read that there was no communication from the fuel pump control module. Live data showed the fuel rail pressure collapsing to around 0.8 bar on startup, which was starving one entire side of the engine. Unplugging the module allowed the pressure to default back up to roughly 4.5 bar, which tells you that all the plumbing was perfectly healthy, and only the intelligence controlling it had failed. Then comes the detail that makes this whole story land completely differently. This is a known failure, because in 2016, Bugatti recalled 72 cars over a fuel tank control unit fault, and the paperwork carried a line that engineers very rarely commit to writing, since it listed the estimated percentage with the defect as 100. The remedy was a revised unit paired with new software. Matt's car already had the revised unit fitted, and it failed regardless. Bugatti quoted $59,358 for the replacement. A supplier explained why a number like that exists at all, pointing out that makers of these bespoke closed modules have to set up entirely dedicated production environments just to produce one single compact electronic component. That explanation is genuinely true, and it is also the entire trap laid out in one sentence. So, somewhere in England tonight, one of the greatest machines ever engineered is sitting in silence, held hostage by a box the size of a paperback, waiting for permission from the only company on Earth that is able to grant it. So, what would you actually do in his position? Pay this amount or keep fighting it alone in that workshop? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely want to know where you land on this one.